In this video we want to deal with business research methods. We want to look at the various approaches that can be adopted by a researcher in order to acquire data which can then be processed into information which will give an insight into the particular topic under investigation. So here we're going to look at business research methods and focus in on those techniques which are most appropriate in the context of business. So, for example, we're not really dealing with issues in the natural sciences, in physics or chemistry or biology or so on. Likewise, we're not dealing with quite abstract ideas, say from areas like philosophy. So we are dealing with research methods into issues in business. Now, first of all, let's start with the meaning of research. It's a search for solutions. It's, if you like, a search for knowledge. So research is targeted on acquiring data which may be processed, may be analysed, and turned into information which will give us an insight into some aspect relating to the business. So, for example, we could have market research, which will give us an insight into the conditions in the market. We could also have research into suppliers or into competitors or into any aspect relating to the business. It's a search for knowledge which will help the management of the business make more effective decisions. Generally speaking, a scientific and systematic search for pertinent information on a specific topic. When we talk about research, we're really talking about a way of acquiring the information. It's not haphazard. It's not just chatting to people. That may be a particular technique adopted in some areas, but generally speaking, we're talking about a very systematic approach to picking up the data that's required. We need to ensure that the data is accurate and that the data is relevant for the inquiry. So it's important that the researcher filter out all of the, if you like, the noise in the system, filter out all of the irrelevancies, and focuses in on the data that is of particular interest in the inquiry. So it's a particular way of doing things. It's focused on trying to find the facts and doing that in a way which uses particular techniques, for example survey techniques or particular techniques of collecting the data. It may be secondary data, it may be going to journals and books, but it's trying to collect relevant information and do it as specifically as possible to the issue under investigation. So research is really a movement from the known to the unknown. Generally speaking, businesses know the current situation. Not always the case, but generally speaking, they have a fair idea of how they're doing right now and what the competitors are doing, what the market is like. But they want to look into perhaps trends in the market, into the direction in which the market is moving. Now that's unknown. So they must now develop techniques to research the market or research various aspects of the market which will give them an insight into what's likely to happen in, say, the next 6 months or the next year or whatever. We can see it as a movement from the known to the unknown. We're moving from what we know right now into a province of which is unknown, but we wish to investigate. We wish to know more about it. We wish to get some insight perhaps into what determines customer demand for the particular product. We wish to know this information because then we can target our marketing more specifically. We can optimize on the marketing budget and so on. So we're moving from the known to the unknown. Now, the definition. It's a careful investigation into some problem, issue, or topic of interest, using past research to determine new facts. That's a good definition of business research methods. It's a careful investigation. As I said, it's not haphazard. It's not just put together quickly and not really thought out. This is carefully thought out, carefully planned, carefully implemented. So it's a careful investigation of some problem, very careful, to try to work out exactly what is the truth behind the particular pattern that we observe or the particular issue that we're concerned with. So it's a question of identifying the issue. What is the issue exactly? So it's important to pose a very clear question. If the question is ambiguous, we can't conduct the research. We're not too sure what we're researching because we're not too sure of the question. So the issue must be clearly stated. And it should be of interest. There's got to be a motivation for the research. The motivation may be to give an insight into the market, as I said earlier, or to how to reduce costs or how to expand the business. There must be a topic of interest. There must be something that motivates the research. And it uses past research. Generally speaking, we build on what previous researchers have done. They have given lots of insights into various issues and developed different methodologies and different ways of approaching the research, and we learn from that. That's the body of knowledge that we can draw upon. And in business we use it, indeed in society we use it. That's why we've got libraries. We keep our ideas in libraries. And we use all of this to try and determine new facts, new insights. And so we're making judgments about situations based on facts, based on a particular methodology. We're inquiring into a particular topic, and we're trying to get a new perspective. That's the whole idea. There are various steps in the research process. And I think it's important to go through these. For example, careful analysis of the problem or research area. That's important. It's important to be aware of the research area and understand what the research area is, what it encompasses, and be prepared to look at it very carefully, very dispassionately, without prejudice, without bringing your own values to bear on it. Try to look at the data as objectively as possible and perform the analysis. So we use previous research, as I said earlier. We try to use the previous research to give us insights into particular issues, and then we formulate hypotheses or hypotheses if it's more than one. So the hypothesis could just be a feeling or a belief that needs testing. Sometimes people believe certain things. That becomes the hypothesis. Let's test to see if the belief is accurate. But we get a lot of hypotheses, lots of ideas for research. We get those from previous research, because previous research throws up questions. And the previous research didn't have the time or the resources to investigate everything. So there may be areas left for further investigation. And that's where we may get this. Capturing the data is necessary to test a hypothesis. It's also important to have the skills and necessary resources to analyze the data and turn it into information. So we've got a hypothesis. Then we go and get data which is relevant to the hypothesis. It must clearly be relevant to the hypothesis, otherwise it's irrelevant itself. So we have data which is related to the hypothesis, and then we must have the resources and the skills. If it's quantitative data, we must have quantitative skills. We must have the ability to work out statistically relationships. If it's qualitative, We must understand the issues involved in the data itself. Was the data accurate? To what extent is the data reliable? So we must have the skills and the resources, perhaps computer resources or just the time. We have the skills and the time to do the analysis. And then we draw conclusions based on the analysis, and we accept or reject a hypothesis. So the hypothesis is a particular statement about something, and when we do the analysis we get a conclusion, and the conclusion either supports the hypothesis, it says yes, that is the true relationship, or yes, that belief was in fact accurate or is accurate. So that may be it. Or it may be the belief was fallacious, was wrong, it was misleading. That belief should be abandoned. So we get conclusions, and the conclusions are based on the data, not based on someone's opinions or someone's prejudice. It's based on the data which has been analysed using some methodology, some technique. Now the objectives of research, well, to investigate a phenomenon so as to gain an understanding into it. That's the whole idea of the research. It's to investigate something, to investigate a belief, to investigate a problem, to investigate a phenomenon, and thereby gain an insight into it, to see how does it work, why is it the way it is, why is the belief accurate or not accurate. And this is called exploratory research. It's exploring ideas and trying to work out what are the relationships. Another objective is to discuss the issue under research and illustrate any insights gained. Sometimes when the research is being proposed or being thought of, it's obscure. Perhaps not many people have thought of it. And sometimes in academic research that's the case. It's the case that the researcher has come up with some very obscure piece of research. It doesn't mean it shouldn't be done, it's not valued. It means just nobody else has thought about it. And it is important to undertake that type of research because that furthers our knowledge. But applied research or practical research gives insights. Perhaps a company conducting research that will give insights into the market or into the cost conditions or the labour market, or give some insight into some relevant issue. And the research gives an indication of the relationships between different phenomena that's been studied. It's one thing to think, for a company to think, let's say, that customers buy the product because its product is cheap, and they may believe that, but they've never investigated it. But when they do investigate it, when they have research conducted into customer motivation, customer buying habits, or customers' approach to buying, they might find that the customers buy the product not because it's cheap, but because the customers see it as good value, good quality. Or the company likes the design of the product, or sorry, the customers like the design of the product. So it's to investigate relationships that sometimes we have an idea of what the facts are, but when we conduct the research and we have more objective knowledge, more widespread views taken into account, we find that something else may be the key determinant. Now the types of research. Well, we have descriptive research. As the name suggests, descriptive research describes the phenomenon accurately and openly. It includes field surveys. So descriptive research is describing something. It's describing it accurately and openly. It's not covering up anything. It's being brutally honest about the description of the phenomenon, and it describes it completely. That's descriptive research. It's giving a complete picture to the reader. The researcher has no control over the variables under investigation. He or she simply reports the facts as they are. So the researcher in this case simply reports what he or she sees. It's descriptive. They are describing the situation. I should say, by the way, about descriptive research, just go back for a moment. On that last point about the researcher just describing what he or she sees, that's in a sense a bit like journalism. Journalists should really describe what they see and describe it accurately. So it's descriptive research. Now, applied research. Well, applied research is focused on solving an immediate problem. So there is a problem, it's a pressing problem, it's an urgent problem. Applied research is trying to find a solution. It's applied research. It's not done for the sake of adding to human knowledge. This one is trying to fix a problem, trying to find an insight into some situation and trying to find a solution to a problem. Fundamental research is focused on gaining an insight into some fundamental concept. This may be in mathematics. This is fundamental research, which is by contrast. So some fundamental problem, say in mathematics or natural sciences, the research leads to greater understanding of underlying relationships, but may have little applied or practical use. So for example, we have a lot of research conducted at universities into astrophysics, into issues about the nature of the universe and the future course of the universe and so on. And that is something that as humans we want to know. That's something that's always occupied our minds since we lived in caves. We've always looked at the sky at night and tried to figure out what was going on. So that type of fundamental research is very important, but it doesn't solve our day-to-day problems. It improves our understanding of the universe in which we live, but it doesn't work out the relationships that we have here and now, work relationships, buying relationships, and so on. We've also got issues in things like, say, mathematics. Issues about the number system, or what's the proof that 1 + 1 = 2, which was proved by Whitehead and Russell in one of their texts. So it took someone a lot of time and a lot of effort to prove that 1 + 1 = 2. Why is that important? And should it not be intuitive anyway? If we hold up two fingers, and if we hold up one finger and one finger, then we've held up two fingers. But it's important to have a formal proof, because all of the system of mathematics depends on our ability to add numbers. So these are obscure topics to most people, and the proofs are very, very difficult and very obscure as well. But these are very important to us. This is the idea of fundamental research. Applied research, by contrast, is trying to fix a problem. It's trying to look at the situation. Right now, there is an issue. There is a problem of some sort. It needs applied research. Then we've got quantitative research. Quantitative research is based on the application of numerical techniques to collected data for the purpose of gaining insights. A lot of research tends to be quantitative, if possible. Quantitative research is seen as somehow more reliable because it's amenable to quantitative analysis, use of statistical techniques, and it's possible to work out standard deviations and averages and modes and means and so on, work out trend lines and regression, and goes on and on. And these are giving us a better understanding of the relationships in the data. So if the data is accurate, we can get pictures, or we can find out the relationships in the data using various techniques. So there is a built-in almost prejudice amongst many researchers that somehow quantitative research is most important. It's not very fair in many respects, because qualitative research is also important. It deals with attitudes and human behaviour, motivations and opinions. And of course, it's attitudes, human behaviour, motivation and opinions that drives the world. We live in a world that's controlled by politicians, most of whom we elect. In some countries they're not elected, just appoint themselves, but in many countries we elect the politicians. And the politicians take power, and the politicians have opinions and motivations and human behaviour. They've got attitudes, and they will pass laws. So the idea of qualitative research is very important. We can't observe attitudes, and we can't observe motivation or opinions. We can observe human behaviour to some extent, but trying to figure out motivation and the opinions and what determines the opinions of certain people and what their attitudes are, that's very complicated. And simply because it's complicated, and simply because it's qualitative, it's not amenable to mathematical analysis, doesn't mean it shouldn't happen. It's very important. Qualitative research can use a variety of approaches: interviews, focus groups, storytelling and attitudinal surveys. Storytelling is one we haven't come across a lot in many of the classes. Storytelling is important. It's how we've moved through history. Sometimes the storytelling can be very misleading and lead to disasters. It can lead to the separations of people and wars and all sorts of issues, because myths and beliefs have been passed down through the millennia. But storytelling can also be very useful in the sense that it can help us learn from previous generations and from the experience of previous generations. Nowadays we tend to codify our storytelling into books and novels and factual accounts and diaries, and we keep these in libraries. And when people find errors in them, there are critiques published of particular books or journals or whatever, and in this way the reader gets a very balanced view. We get the original perceptions and we get the criticisms, and in this way our ideas are refined. But the other types, interviews, focus groups and attitudinal surveys. Attitudinal surveys normally involve the Likert scale, which is an attitudinal scale. So it's normally, say, a 5-point scale. Strongly dislike, next one is dislike, next one is neutral, next one is like, and then strongly like. So we'd have 5 points and ask the respondent to pick a particular one in the context of some particular issue. Interviews and focus groups are dealt with extensively in other videos. So there are approaches to the qualitative research. There's also conceptual and empirical research. Now, conceptual research is related to some idea or theory. It's a quest for knowledge for its own sake. This is usual in pure mathematics or the natural sciences, to inquire into some fundamental relationship. And we talked about this just a couple of moments ago in terms of fundamental research, we called it. And another name for it here is conceptual research. So fundamental research we met earlier, and conceptual research, really the same sort of areas and same sort of ideas. People who research into very obscure areas of mathematics are promoting human knowledge. They are finding relationships between variables or within the number system or within the different areas that are covered by mathematics. They're finding relationships that we didn't know previously. And when they do their proof, we've all gained. We may not think we have because it's so obscure, but we have. Because as a species, we now know something we didn't know before. So it's conceptual or fundamental research. The same in physics and in chemistry. When scientists do something which is very obscure and doesn't seem to benefit mankind immediately or in any fundamental way, we think, why was that research conducted? Why did people waste their time doing it? But the fact is, human knowledge has been advanced. And we never know. Perhaps in the future we will need that. Now that's already been done. So we have the results. We know the relationship. It's been discovered. There's been conceptual or fundamental research in the area. And in the future, someone applying some research or developing a new product may go back and look at those relationships and say they now understand how to move from one point to the next. It's been solved by some academic perhaps years earlier. Empirical research uses experience or observation to test some hypothesis. Empirical research, empirical means done by experiment. It's using our experiences or observations to test some hypothesis. It's trying to work out what is the fact of the matter, what is the relationship between, let's say, 2 variables or 10 variables. But what is the relationship? And in a sense, with quantitative research, this does not depend on our opinions. These are the facts. Like in physics, the relationship between the objects that are being tested does not depend on the observer. But for some empirical research, it may be that an observer is used and the observer will have to make accurate observations and report accurately his or her experiences, because that's a part of the research method. We also have experimental research. If the hypothesis is capable of testing by an appropriate research technique, this is experimental research. The researcher designs the experiment, and in this context he or she is active in the research design. So experimental research, sometimes in laboratories at universities or in research institutes, scientists set up experiments. They don't know what the outcome is. They just have an idea if they add certain chemicals to a petri dish or whatever. They add certain chemicals and they observe certain reactions and they write it up. It's an experiment. And then they try to reproduce it. Will the outcome be the same every time? Or was it a freak outcome? Was it an unusual outcome? So we have experimental research trying to work out the relationship between various things. More on the empirical research. Well, first of all, develop a working hypothesis from past research, a literature or some problem. For example, metal stock holdings in the car industry are determined by movements in the exchange rate. Now that's a working hypothesis, that the amount of metal stock holding in the car industry is determined by the exchange rate. So we're postulating a relationship between the exchange rate and the amount of metal stock in the car industry. So test it. And we may find that the data is 50%. What we call the R squared would be 50%, let's say, or 40% or 60%, whatever. So we find it's some figure. But that means something else must be partly determining it, not just the exchange rate, something else. Perhaps the demand for cars, the state of the economy. So looking at the empirical research, where we can have a hypothesis. We can have a hypothesis about almost anything and attempt to test it. And in that sense, it's empirical. We're trying to find the facts of the matter. So we collect the data to test the hypothesis. Once we've got a working hypothesis, for example, the one I've just given, we collect some data. We would collect a lot of data on the exchange rate over a long period of time. We collect data on the amount of metal stock holding in the car industry over the same period of time. So in a sense, we can try to now imagine it as two long columns of data. Now we can try and analyze to see if there is a relationship between the two columns. As one increases, will the other increase, or will the other decrease? Or is there any relationship? There might be no relationship whatever. That's the idea of the research, to try and determine, is there a relationship between, in the example we got here, is there a relationship between the exchange rate and metal stock holdings in the car industry? Now, apply some numerical technique to test a hypothesis. For example, regression analysis in statistics. So we may do a regression. We may become very sophisticated in the type of regression we do. We could do a linear regression. We could do a non-linear regression. We can take the logarithms of the data and regress one on the other, a double log regression. We can do all sorts of complicated analysis, because these techniques have evolved as well. Statisticians are engaged in research in their own area and publishing their findings about their developments in statistical analysis. So we could apply lots of different types of statistical tests to try and find the relationship. So now we've got a hypothesis, we've picked up some data that's related to the hypothesis, and now we're applying some techniques to analyze the data. Now, this form of research is used when testing a hypothesis. Is important. So this is one which is quantitative. It's empirical. In a sense, it's doable. Doable in the sense that we have a hypothesis which gives us the main components of the research, metal stock holdings and the exchange rate in the example I've given. We have a hypothesis. Then we have some technique. We have a computer program perhaps to do the regression. We might have statistical package for the social sciences, SPSS. Or there are many other packages available on computers which are very powerful and give all the statistics we'll ever want. And we test the relationship. Now, exploratory and formalized research. Well, exploratory research, the purpose of exploratory research is to develop hypotheses. It reviews the literature and studies the problem and then sets out a plan for subsequent research if required. So it's exploratory. It's exploring the hypothesis. It's exploring the issues. It's exploring the problem. It's exploring the data. It's just exploring it. It's just looking at it and trying to find out, can the research take place? Is it possible to research this particular area? How would the research be conducted? What issues have to be taken into account? What sources of data? What are the problems? What resources will be required? It's looking at the whole feasibility of the research. Formalized research, well, these are well-structured and substantial studies that test specific hypotheses. So it's formalized. It's looking at specific hypotheses. Some very precise hypothesis, very well-defined hypothesis. Some question, if you like. A hypothesis is really like a question. Some relationship between two variables. That's the hypothesis. The hypothesis postulates a relationship between two variables or between many variables. And then a well-structured piece of research is very formalized. It sets out methodically to analyze the problem. Collect data, use appropriate techniques, be very objective, be very precise, and come to a very objective set of conclusions. Now, that just about concludes this video. In it we've looked at different approaches to business research methods and looked at the types of research that can be conducted. It's a very important video, and it's important that you go back over it, look over the various ideas, make your own notes and do some supplementary research. Have a good set of notes and have them written out clearly, and make sure that you understand every point in the notes. But that's all I'm going to deal with here, so I'm going to leave it at that and say thank you for watching.